Since Scott started the service with a attitude of honesty, I figured might as well continue it. It was interesting because we got together and we realized both of us were feeling this angst, whatever it was. And for me, actually, this morning about 3:30, I woke up for 2 hours. I laid there going through the directory, not by name and alphabetical, but just continually names coming up, and in every one of them, thinking how much I failed as a pastor. And that's how I spent my hours before I wake up to go to church. And yet, and through it all, realizing it's not about me and that kind of stuff. And oftentimes, even as I talk, it's like, I just don't want to give information. So the last thing to do is, this isn't a speech class. And a belief in the vision of wanting people to live with joy, full joy. Believing that when you love God with all your heart, you care for others like you do yourself, and you serve Christ in the world with passion and purpose, you'll experience that joy and that peace. And the frustration, if you will, of almost like, how can we get there? And, what is it that someone else could do that I haven't done, and that kind of stuff. And all of it, of course, is lies, because I'm a great pastor. But, no. Hey, no pity clap. I don't need a pity clap. I don't want a pity clap. No. But it's realizing then when he's coming here, realizing how much Satan is attacking, and then I didn't even come with my belt, and my wife had to bring the belt, and the internet didn't work, and all this stuff, and it was like, oh man, what is going on related to that? But maybe it's fitting because really the subject today is about worship. And worship has nothing to do with even what you feel or how you feel or any actions of the things that you do. It's so much more than that when you look at that. And that's kind of what we're looking at today as we kind of go through this. And we're in a series that's called Journey to the Cross. And in this particular series, if you're visiting with us and this is your first week, in this particular series, the idea is that we're looking at from Palm Sunday to Jesus' resurrection, these incidents, these events, these moments that took place, and what was really going on in those particular events. And they were encounters with Jesus that aren't just about teaching or learning something, but rather in that encountering moment, there are things that we can learn even about ourselves and how we live along the way. And so the first week we talked about is the Palm Sunday, the entrance into Jerusalem, and it was about realizing that we have agendas. And sometimes those agendas aren't aligned. Even in the agenda in my mind of wanting to do stuff to help the church and all this kind of stuff, they can not necessarily be in line with what God's agenda is. And in those moments we learn we got to let go of that. And we got to just really be willing to go where Jesus wants to go. And last week we talked about Jesus clearing the temple. And maybe that's even more profound, certainly even from my context, because it's that idea of looking at that process that takes place when Jesus enters into us. We're the temple of God in our life, and how He cleans out these false ideas and thoughts and the evil or the sin in our life, and draws us into a place of prayer and healing and restoration, and the response is praise. And we looked at all of that, and that's what took place in that and that's what takes place in us. And oftentimes, that's what happens in all of our lives. And it's a great fit for what it is today, because we move into a place of the story of Jesus being anointed at Bethany, and it's a story about worship. And how in all that we've just described, you move to this place of worship with God. And so turn with me, if you want to, in Matthew 26. It's page 1543. If you're using the Bibles in front of you, maybe you can't see them, but if you're using it, it'll be on the screen as well. But Matthew 26, there you go, a little bit light. So it's good. It's the same story that actually is in Mark 14 and John 12. So there's three different places three different contexts where you got like witnesses at a crime scene. Maybe it's a bad example, but witnesses at a scene. You got a perspective from three different people that's being told. But having said that, what's interesting is this is also a story there is discrepancy. So Matthew makes it sound like it happened after he entered into Jerusalem, whereas Mark doesn't really say, but John describes it as happening prior to, the night before. It says 6 days before the Sabbath, so that would have put it around Friday or Thursday or Friday the previous week, before he entered into the Sabbath. And the one thing scholars know is that Matthew wasn't about chronological order. His whole purpose of writing was about helping people see the Messiah. And so the way he wrote was more how does it fit into this message of the Messiah. And so Most think it's probably what John had said, that it happened prior to, but it doesn't really matter. We're going to follow Matthew because the story isn't about when it took place and the incident, but rather it's a story about what happened in that particular situation and how that incident or that scene or that event might challenge our own life in the way that we live. And so let's read the passage first of all, and then we're going to kind of take a look at a little bit about it. And so it's Jesus being anointed at Bethany, chapter 26 of Matthew, starting at verse 6. This is what we read. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of a man named Simon the leper. Don't you love to have a title like that in your life? You know, Mark the liar. I doubt he was going around necessarily like that, but certainly in the story they wanted to know who he was as related to others, I guess. But anyway, Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of a very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head, and as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste? They asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my head, she did it to prepare me for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." I'd like to title this, if you will, this message of being worshiping in the deep end. Because that's what's really going on here in this story when we kind of look at it. It's a room full of people. Obviously it's a house and it's a dinner, and so it's an intimate setting. It's not like the Sermon on the Mount with 5,000 people or anything like that there. But they're all followers of Jesus. If you asked them, the people in that room, they would say, "Yeah, I follow Jesus. I worship Jesus. I believe in Jesus. That's why I'm here." And so they all would say that they're worshipers or followers of Jesus. And yet, a woman like Mary comes in here in this particular situation. She takes this description of worship or this image of worship to a whole different level in this particular scene. A whole different depth, if you will, when you try to understand what is going on. And so we're challenged through this to question our own level of worship and where we're at. Would people look at my worship and say, "Oh, that's a beautiful thing"? Would people look at my worship or our worship or your worship, and would they say that, yeah, that worship goes to such a depth as it relates to Jesus and where they're at? Would it be something they would say would be similar to the way that Mary was in her particular worship? Well, what I wanted to do with this particular passage is kind of look at those in attendance, and by doing that, kind of look at four types of worshipers, if you will, that are going on in this. And each type kind of brings worship to a deeper level as we look at them, obviously hoping that we would kind of really be able to see how we can get to that level of what Mary had defined or shown in this story. So let's look at this then, these four types. The first one is a self-serving, and these titles are names I just picked. They're just, so maybe you need to write down the description to better understand it. I couldn't get them in all S's. I couldn't, the idea was just to say this is kind of what I'm categorizing this. And I don't even want to judge the people in the room because we don't know the whole story of all of them. We can look in other areas as we will, but we don't know the whole story. But in a kind of a general sense, I'm using it as a way to categorize, if you will, the type of worshipers that were there. And so the first one is a self-serving worshiper. And this is really misleading to us because it's really not a worshiper at all when we think about it. It's a person who gives the appearance of a worshiper or a follower, but really isn't. This person has their own agenda going on, and everything they're doing in the context of worship and that appearance is really for their own personal gain, their own personal benefit. And so in this case, the person is Judas Iscariot. Verse 8 in this passage, it says that the disciples were complaining about this waste of this perfume. And so you'd say, all 12 are sitting there complaining. But if you look into John 12, if you want to jump over there to John and maybe see it for yourself, but John 12, you see a different, more detailed expression of what was going on in that particular one in John 12. Verse 4, this is what John wrote, who was there. He says, after she had poured this perfume, he says, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It is worth a year's wages. And then at verse 6, John writes, he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Here we see, and here the disciples didn't know at the time, but they had an embezzler in the group. They had someone who was skimming money off, and using it for his own benefit. And he hated seeing that perfume being wasted. It was a year's wages, not because he thought, "Oh, think of all the good things we could do." He's thinking about, think of the amount of money I could gain personally out of this perfume if she was just to give it to us and let us be responsible for distributing it. His motives were solely his own interest in what he was doing. In fact, if you go back to Matthew, after this passage we read, verses 14 through 16 talk about how he goes then to betray Jesus. It's as if this was the final straw. He had an agenda. He's been with Jesus for his own gain. He has his own mission. He's expecting to overthrow the government, and he's seeing things are not going the way he's planned. Final straw, some woman comes in, spends a year's wages just pouring perfume on this Jesus, and he's okay with that. And that's enough. Judas is done. He's not interested in following anymore. And so we see what really is a person here that's kind of self-serving. And so the first question, of course, then is, does that self-serving worshiper define you? I would hope it doesn't. At some level, of course, we all go in for a selfish, maybe motives and reasons, but we hope quickly that you move out of that place. If it is, you're looking at a person as Jesus is strictly there for my own personal gain. I get the relationship thing, I pray to God and stuff, but I expect God to bless me. I expect God to give to me. I have things that I want to accomplish by thinking that I'm going to jump through hoops for God, that God is going to respond and give me what I need. And the minute God no longer plays that plan with me, the minute God no longer lives up to his end of the deal that I have, I'm out of here. That's a self-serving worshiper that you would describe here that is going on. And of course, that's not what God wants. He wants genuine worship. He doesn't want something like that. In fact, there's stories in Matthew where people who followed Jesus said they did a lot of things for Jesus, and Jesus said, "I don't even know you." Because it wasn't about any kind of relationship. It was about actions that had a means to an end. And that's not what God is about. But the good news, of course, is that you can start there, but God can draw you, Christ can draw you into far more than that. And it's, as far as God's concerned, that's a fine place to start. But he wants to be able to push us into a deeper level of understanding what worship really is. And so we kind of go to the second one then. Is we go from a self-serving kind of a worship person or to one that is self-motivated. Granted, it was another S, but it was motivated. I guess S is self-relevant. But anyway, I'm all over the place. Hey, I woke up at 3:30. Give me some slack. Anyway. So this person is genuinely, seeking to worship God. They seek Christ in the context of their own life. They understand that. They do have a little bit of their own agenda going on, but it's not so self-seeking necessarily. It's more of a sense of it's God and me, Jesus and me, and we're working together. It's more of a partnership perspective that they have going on, but they have a lot to learn about real worship. In this particular one, I use it to describe the disciples that are in this room. I know that sounds almost like, wait, these are disciples, people, but we understand, we all know that when we look at the story, these disciples were not in the place they needed to be yet when it came to following Jesus. They were with Jesus, but they saw it in the context of a mission, a cause that they're going for. They were following Jesus because he was the Messiah, and they wanted to be a part of what he was doing, and they were into the strategizing agendas. They probably had vision seminars and things that they wanted to do to be able to get this plan together, this mission together, and we could build this thing together.